45 years, the United States Supreme Court has recognized the college's freedom to decide how to build diverse student bodies and to meet their responsibility of opening doors of opportunity for every single American. In case after case, including recently, just as a few years ago in 2016, the court has affirmed and reaffirmed this view that colleges could use race not as a determinative factor for admission, but as one of the factors among many in deciding who to admit from a already qualified pool of applicants. Today, the court once again walked away from decades of precedent. The court has effectively ended affirmative action in college admissions. And I strongly disagree with the court's decision.
Of course, that was President Joe Biden this morning reacting to the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action effectively. The conservative court ruled that the race-conscious admissions programs at Harvard and University of South Carolina are unlawful, effectively ending the policy nationwide. Now, this is despite the fact that the Supreme Court has actually in the past in several rulings on affirmative action used the Harvard model as an example of how to effectively do affirmative action within the bounds of the Constitution. So this is undoing precedent that's been held several times in our past. NBC News spoke with students at Harvard, and most of them, unsurprisingly, did not agree with this decision.
Well, Anna, the majority of the students that I've spoken to, and I've been in conversation with them for weeks leading up to this moment, they are reeling, they are devastated, and they're worried about what the culture, what the makeup of their classes, the future generations coming up behind them at Harvard, what they're going to look like in the future.
Is a little bit conflicting, especially when you're like, I've worked so hard my whole life to get to this point, and I don't want my racial identity to stop me from, becoming who I want to be. But then it's on the flip side to that, I feel like some racial minorities or identities and groups of people have had harder experiences in America and are not given the same opportunities as other majority groups.
Now, other universities have chosen to end affirmative action in their past. Numbers of Black students at those universities plummets almost immediately. Let's just compare the most recent admission rates of Black students in UCLA, which eliminated race as a factor here. You see 5% undergraduate, 6% graduate, versus Harvard that had affirmative action in place. 15%, that is a massive difference. Now, of course, not all of the justices agreed with the opinion in this court. It was divided exactly along political lines, with the liberal justices dissenting, and Justice Sotomayor wrote a 69-page dissent arguing that this ruling rolls back decades of progress that we've made in America. So just this in part from her dissent. In so holding, the court cements the superficial rule of colorblindness as a constitutional principle in an endemically segregated society where race has always mattered and continues to matter. Now, some people make the argument that affirmative action practices are harmful to Asian American students. New York Times wrote that Students for Fair Admissions noted in its brief that an entire industry exists to help them appear less Asian on their college applications. The group said that compared with other racial groups, applicants of Asian descent consistently received a lower personal rating, a subjective score for traits like self-confidence, likability, and kindness. 2009 Princeton study showed that Asians had to score 140 points higher on the SAT than whites to have the same chance of admission to top universities. Now, this is the argument that was being made by the organization bringing forward this court case. Despite that, 70% of Asian Americans support affirmative action programs, despite what the narrative of this case would have you believe. 70% of Asian Americans support affirmative action. And USA Today wrote about this, saying, despite polling data and widespread Asian American activism in support of affirmative action, Students for Fair Admissions, whose conservative donors have engaged in a larger crusade targeting issues including voting rights, have sought to paint a different picture. They are, critics say, using Asian Americans as a wedge to incite infighting among communities of color. And the man crusading for the end to affirmative action, the attorney leading Students for Fair Admission, is 71-year-old white man, Edward Bloom. Now, Bloom had previously enlisted white students to sue over race-based admissions at the University of Texas in 2003, and he lost. And we tried a new tactic with the Harvard case, claiming that high-achieving Asian American applicants were disadvantaged by screening policies that favored Black and Hispanic students. Now, he also, if you're wondering, some of his other work, engineered a series of lawsuits against the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is not a man that cares about equality for Asian Americans. And Jackson, there is something really, I think, really gross about misrepresenting, the opinions of Asian Americans as if this is, a crusade that Asian American students are fighting for, when in reality, 70% of Asian Americans support affirmative action programs.
Yeah, it's definitely a cheap cop out, kind of similar to, well, we want to keep women in the house because we care about their safety. It's not because I'm insecure and, I think that every time my woman leaves my sight, another Chad will come swoop her away. It's the same type of insecurity with power. A lot of times, you look at the population density. What's America like? Still over 60% Caucasian for the most part. When you look at Black populations, they're typically in inner city areas. So affirmative action is not something that stands in the way of qualified white people from being able to get jobs. If you look at it at a case-by-case basis, the type of people who would get mad at it are people who watch too much Fox News and they assume that, well, we're just giving these people jobs because they're Black, or someone's, idiot son or idiot nephew didn't get a job that they were handed because someone, because other than that, it's kind of like cry me a river, go apply somewhere else. You know what I mean? This just isn't something that really is a real economic problem. But the Supreme Court, they rolled this back. They rolled back Roe v. Wade. They're rolling back the EPA's ability to do its job. Ron DeSantis and many other Republicans, they always talking about, we're going to eliminate the education department because, who needs that? And what does that do? It's just insecurity to power. It's just being able to maintain the pillars of classism. That's all it is.
Right. And just to all of the conservative women who are cheering this on, the group that was most likely to benefit from affirmative action were white women in America. So way to shoot yourself in the foot. But one person who, I can't think of a better example of I got mine, so I don't care if you get yours, is Clarence Thomas, who of course was on the conservative side in this opinion. He literally was the beneficiary of this type of program. So Newsweek reported that in 1971, Justice Thomas was admitted to Yale's law school as part of the affirmative action practice, according to PBS, which reported that the school wanted 10% of its incoming class that year to be students of color. So, Jackson, that's just it. Of course he would do it.
Of course, definitely. And what was it? The list that came out of everything they were willing to strike down, but not interracial marriage because
right.
My wife is white, so we can't have that. But affirmative action is why Clarence Thomas is on the Supreme Court bench. Joe Biden, that was his affirmative action, literally, because when people were coming after him, Joe Biden was one of the key people who was like, now, we can't do this. He's a Black man. It'll be a good look. We got to get him on that bench. That affirmative action in action right there. But again, it's just all for me, none for thee. And really, these people are a joke. And unfortunately, they have the reins to power. But the more I'm involved in politics, the more I just say, you can't work with them. You just got to beat them. And it's as simple as that.